Welcome to Vanished Vail, the monthly series where we take you to Vail's very special places. I'm standing here on the porch of the 1915 Section Foreman House. Over the past 7 years, Vail Preservation Society has worked with the Vail School District and the Cienega High School Construction Tech students to rehabilitate and adaptively reuse this 1915 building. What do you say we take a quick look inside? Come on. The Section Foreman House hasn't always sat in the middle of a school. It started its life at Marsh Station, and it actually moved 2 other times before it was eventually moved here, right in the middle of the Esmond Station K-8 campus while the school was under construction. This story might seem extraordinary, but for most of Vail's history, this was actually a very common occurrence. Materials were expensive and hard to come by. Homes and their materials were often dismantled, moved, repurposed. Very little was wasted. Today we're going to introduce you to a family that made their home in Vail in the 1980s. And like many other earlier Vail families, they repurposed salvaged materials from earlier Vail structures to build their home. So let's go meet the Lumias. I think Jeannie's waiting for us. Well, Jeannie, I would love it if you would share with us what brought your family to Vail.
We used to live out west of Tucson, outside of the city, and we liked that area. Then we moved into Tucson, and we were there for 11 years. And while we were living in Tucson, we realized, you know, we really like it better away from town. So about that time, we ran into Rick Daly, who used to be a neighbor of ours when we lived in town, and we went out to visit him in the area where he lived. Long story short, we ended up buying 5 acres out of his 20 or 40 acres that he had, and that's how we ended up out here.
Oh, that's great. So when you first came out to Vail, what were your first impressions?
Well, when we first came to this spot, coming over that hill and looking down into this valley or canyon or whatever it was breathtaking. It's just absolutely gorgeous. You got the mountains and the valley, and it just seems to go on forever. And our first thought coming over that hill was, oh my goodness, this is where we want to be. And it ended up pretty much that way.
It is absolutely gorgeous. What year was it when you came out here?
Oh, we came out here in 1980.
1980.
Yeah. The first thing we did was we built that shop, 12 foot by 22 foot, and we lived in that for a year while we built the house. That was the start of our adventure.
Was there electricity? Was there telephone?
Electricity wasn't difficult because the line ran right down there. So we got electricity for free. I mean, they just put it in. But there's no telephone service, there's no natural gas, and there's no water. So those were things we probably should have paid a little more attention to. Because the very first thing that we did after we built the shop was to drill the well. And they actually drilled the well right about there. And we had it doused beforehand, and supposedly the water was at 250 feet. And so he drilled to 700 feet and said he found water, went away for the holiday. When he came back, the well had collapsed around his equipment. So it was gone. So he said he owed us a well. So he ended up drilling 6 more holes. Couldn't find water. But by that time, we had gone through more than half of our construction money. After that, we thought, well, we better see what we can do about building a house. So we started with the infrastructure. We got the plumbing in and the footing, and then we were ready to pour the floors, the concrete floors. only because there's no water here, the cement truck refused to go down that hill because it was too steep, or he just couldn't do it. So we couldn't get cement delivered, concrete delivered. We had to do it with a mixer. So that was a big production. John was a cement finisher, so he did the finishing. We had Mike, who was a 16-year-old, 120-pound asthmatic kid. He was operating the mixer. He'd pick up those 100-pound bags of concrete, throw them in the mixer. Gina would bring a 5-gallon bucket of water, throw it in, some sand, I'd forget the mixture, and then dump it into the wheelbarrow. John would take it over, and that went on for the whole house. That was a lot of work, a lot of work.
Maybe share a little bit about what your children thought and how they reacted when you and your husband told them you were moving out here to Vail.
Well, they were obedient kids. They kind of did what they were told, but when we decided to move out here, we really didn't consult them. We just decided that's what we were going to do, and we did it. And so, you know, when they found out we were really going to do it, they were horrified. They liked it out here when we came out for visits and stuff. They had a great time. But to live out here was another matter. And it took them a long time before they got where they were loving it too. Because we had horses, and they would go horseback riding, and there was a lot of things out here to do. And they would bring their friends out on the weekends and so forth. But it was not what they were, the way they were brought up in the city, so to speak. So.
Oh. Well, the house is just beautiful, and I really love the stonework and the fireplace. How did you come up with the design?
Well, it kind of had to do with the well. We started out with a design of was 1,500 square feet or something, and it ended up being 1,000 because every day we had less and less money, so we'd cut off more from the house. So it ended up with what's the easiest design you could have, and I think I sat down at the kitchen table and drew out a floor plan. Okay, it's 30 by 40, and you know, we want 3 bedrooms and a bathroom, and that's how it ended up being. It's very, very basic, and it worked. The rocks ended up being what the construction was, because by the time we got through with the cement floor and the sewer and the plumbing and all that, we kind of were running really low on money. So at that time, Rancho del Lago, where today they're building houses going from the Pantano all the way up to the golf course, that was where Motorola had been, and they were going to demolish the whole area and put a golf course in. We ended up getting a permit, and we had like a month to get whatever we wanted to out of there. So that's how we got all those mission tile roofs, the mission tiles, and well, the windows have been replaced, but we got all the windows and bathroom fixtures and wood, a lot of wood from the roofs of those houses, and the flooring. We got a lot of building materials from there. Well, we ended up with the rock instead of burnt adobe because we were in a hurry to do something, and we were out of funds. So it's amazing what you can do when you don't have anything to do it with.
So there are 7,000 rocks in your home?
More or less.
More or less? Wow. So was this a family activity then, to gather the rocks? And
it was. We would gather the rocks on the weekends because I worked in town and the kids went to school, and we would gather the rocks on the weekends, and then during the week we would make a big pile, and then John would use them and he would build whatever from those rocks. So that's how we did that. And then the wood part of it, besides the wood we got from Del Lago, we got crating lumber from the railroad, which turns out to be good wood. So the walls are 6 or 8 inches thick. So it's It's a sturdy house.
Yeah.
And then, of course, when that was all done, we got the utility poles from TEP, and that's, you can see them inside there. There's 26 utility poles.
Oh, and okay, and so those are part of the roof structure.
They are. You can see them inside the house.
Yes.
They're in the ceiling, but they were old. They had the gaff marks in them, and they've got, you see people climb the poles. And they weigh, I think each one was like 600 pounds apiece. So
See, those are very heavy.
they are. I remember the day we put them up there. I was sleeping, and John came in and he said, "Jeanne, I want you to pray." And I go, "Why can't you do it?" He goes, "Because you do it better than I do." "Okay, well, what do you want me to pray?" And he said, "Pray that when those poles get up there, the house doesn't collapse." Anyway, it didn't.
And it still hasn't.
No, it's very strong.
Thinking about daily life again while you were building your house, how long did the process take, and what was mealtime like?
Well, you have to get organized because you don't, I worked and I'd get home at 6 o'clock at night. I cooked on a open fire for most of that year. I think we had a Coleman stove we used for some things, but we were pretty much camped out for that year that it took us to build the house. And we actually slept in it. The first night was like exactly a year after we bought it. It took us that long. And we pretty much worked on it continuously. We didn't take any breaks. So it was a long process. But everything was organized. I mean, I went to work at the same time, I came home at the same time. I would take the kids to the bus, and they'd take the bus to South Point from my work. Everything was all organized. And then in the evenings, we would do whatever we could. In the winter, not much, but in the summer we would. And then the weekends were when everything happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, when we really got caught up.
What made you decide to move from this beautiful place?
Well, it was a really tough decision because I was out here for 4 years by myself after John died. And because it's so far out and the road is not real friendly, nobody ever came out to visit me. And I didn't spend a lot of time here. I traveled a lot. And I just thought, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. I'm not getting any younger. And I had another house in Vail that I bought in 2004, in Del Lago, actually. And so I just made the decision one day, I'm gonna do that well, then I'm gonna sell this house. And that's what I did. It took me a year to sell it. Finding a buyer for this place, as much as I liked it, is difficult because people don't necessarily want to live that far off the road. And it's kind of interesting because when we first moved out here and our friends would come out to visit us, it was always interesting to see that half of them said, "I'd give anything to live out here." And the other half said, "I wouldn't live out here for anything." But now I'm living in Vail in a neighborhood, and I'm contented and happy and don't worry about water or anything. But I miss this place still.
Is there anything that you would like all the newcomers who live in this beautiful community that it's becoming, what would you like them to know about the Vail that you first came to?
Right. I would love for them to appreciate what was here before. I think it's easy not to, but where the old post office is now is where we bought all of our animal food, hay and grain and everything. And so it was useful at that time too, but you still could see what it was, what it used to be, and it had history to it. And maybe that's it. Maybe it's history. The old Vail, the way it used to be, the things that are still here but won't be for long, it's history. And I think history is very important. I think it helps us to know who we are. I mean, a lot of people are into things like genealogy where you check back with who your ancestors were, and I love that sort of thing because it was here before me, and once I'm gone, was I ever here? You know, it's important to look back at what history was and what it meant to you, and what it means to you today.
This is a really authentic Vail story because those early settlers, they absolutely repurposed. They didn't waste anything.
Right.
And to me, that's
Even the people before us, Rick Daley did that with his house. The Miller's Ranch, they built their house themselves. It wasn't a, you know, manufactured house or a pre-built house. It gives you a good feeling to have accomplished that and to know that, you know, you really did something in the community that people just don't do anymore.
Yeah, very rarely. Yeah, so that has to be very satisfying.
It is. It's a very special place to me, that's for sure.
Wow, that was a great visit. It was so beautiful out there where Jeanne's family made their home. You know, it just really brings home to me how if we pay attention to the details and the stories of our lives, we're all so interconnected to each other and to the place that we call home. I hope that you'll join us again next time for another Vanished Vail. See you then.